Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Jason Gottschalk. I am the VP of Product Innovation at Petalo. Formerly, I was in operations in the senior care side. I was an administrator and executive director, among other things, at a large community here in rural Maryland.
I am Camille Roussel. I'm the CEO of Petalo, and I come from the senior care space as well on the corporate side. I helped oversee compliance, IT, and everything else at the corporate office. And today we're going to share a little bit about what we're seeing coming in the short term in senior care, impacted by technology and such. And so we're going to switch over to the presentation here.
Okay, well, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about the first trend, how speed will drive consumer engagement.
Before we get started with that, though, I think it's important to go back and reflect on what is the Great Acceleration and how we got here. So for a long time, all of human endeavor was mostly focused on survival, which largely was driven by gathering enough food to stay alive. Then we hit our first real explosive trend, which was the agricultural revolution, where now all of a sudden we could grow enough food to feed ourselves, grow families, and have a much larger population. With this growth in population, we actually started developing new trends, which we now take for granted, such as modern currency and modern governments, which really started from people being able to specialize in jobs other than growing food. Some of those jobs included scientific and technological research, which is what's driving a lot of the trends we see today.
So in the agricultural period, productivity was still largely driven by manual labor. In other words, productivity equaled human or animal labor. And so to double the output required doubling the human or animal input, the human demand power. So in the agricultural period, growth trends were still in their nascent stage. In other words, there was no real noticeable shift in growth within a lifespan. You were unlikely to change economic class. You were unlikely to change your job or your circumstances, the ones that you were born into. Similarly, the world around you didn't change that much. Nothing significant would have changed from the time you were born to the time you would have died. In the Industrial Revolution, productivity equaled human labor plus machinery or capital expenditure. In other words, to double the output required doubling the capital expenditure. And then in the technological revolution, we have another part to the equation, which is exponential technology. Productivity now became human labor plus exponential technology. In order to double the output, required doubling innovation, and that became exponential.
So we talked about all these things doubling and how the change of productivity comes about, and we've seen exponential trends like what's happening with technology. Everyone's familiar with how powerful computers get, doubling in performance every year. But it turns out there's a lot of other trends, human-driven trends, that are all growing at the same rate. Some of them just aren't as visible or not as prevalent in our day-to-day lives. Growth of all these trends happening at the same time is what scientists are referring to as the Great Acceleration. And if you look at trends such as land domestication, which is the amount of land for purposes like growing food or for housing and habitation, that is growing at an exponential pace. Aquaculture, which is the farming of the oceans, we continue to fish up more fish every year than we have any year beforehand. This extends into socioeconomic trends such as population growth we talked about, but tourism and the interchange of commerce, where we're spending money and spending time in each other's countries and each other's cultures, is happening at a faster and faster pace. Production of every kind, from paper and water, energy usage, is all accelerating at exponential rates. And cultural trends as well. If we look at how marriage opinions have changed over time, the change in opinions on intermarriage versus same-sex marriage versus cohabitation, those changes are happening faster on a cultural level. You look at marijuana legalization, for example, and what's happening at the state-to-state level, and how something that was a Class 1 drug is now legal in many states, and that trend seems to be accelerating. Fashion trends, which we'll talk about again, can come and go in a matter of weeks sometimes. Or even communication trends, where things used to get posted by mail or messenger, email came along, all that, and then came text. And now we have social media as one of the primary means of communication between folks. Some of these trends are positive, though. If you look at the amount of free time available in a household, we are no longer working 16, 20-hour days most of the time. And when you get home, you have tools like washing machines and microwaves and laundromats. They can reduce the amount of domestic labor required, opening up time for hobbies and personal interests.
So what exactly do we mean by exponential phenomena? You can think of it as the speed of growth depends on how much it's grown. Or another way to think about it, a process where the more it happens, the more it happens. So some examples of this could be infectious diseases, as we're experiencing now, jumping from host to host within a population. Memes spreading through social media as each follower retweets or reposts. A wildfire breaking out, such as the wildfires that we've seen in Australia. Ideas, practices diffusing through an entire culture very quickly. And even something like neutrons cascading through the hunk of enriched uranium. So another way to look at it could be to think about rice. If you have 30 days of rice, each day you add one new piece of rice, day 1, 1, day 2, 2, day 3, 3, etc. At the end of a month, you end up with about 500 grains of rice, which is equal to about a tablespoon. However, 30 days of rice doubling, day 1, 1, day 2, 2, day 3, 4, etc. At the end of a month, you end up with about 1 billion grains of rice, or a small silo of rice. Exponentials are very hard for us to wrap our kind of human brains around. We're not really good at large numbers. You think about 1 million seconds, that's about 11.5 days. But 1 billion seconds is 32 years. Significant difference.
So all of this is coming at us like a freight train, and exponentials all around us. So what does this actually mean? And it means that we're no longer able to keep up with things and use the same tools we have in the past. For a scientific approach to this, for example, the Journal of Medical Library Association looked at how an epidemiologist current and how much time they would have to spend reading new journal material to be current with everything happening in their field. They did this study in 2004, and at that time in 2004, they found that an epidemiologist would have to spend 26 days of every month researching and reading new journal articles just to be current on everything that's happening in their field. Since then, the rate of research, the rate of publication has only accelerated. So we're now at a point where it's impossible for a human to keep up with the generation of new materials and the generation of new knowledge. Even as a group of humans, we can't do it. So the tools we've used and relied on in the past will no longer serve us well. We need new tools and new approaches.
And we also need to think about second-order disruption. It's not just the primary causes, but also what those causes might cause. For example, in Buenos Aires, car wash operators saw a 50% decline in revenue over the 10-year period between 2000 and 2010. They couldn't figure it out. There was an increasing middle class. There was an increase in the number of road. There was a great cultural pride in showcasing clean, beautiful cars. What the root cause was an increased reliability and availability of weather forecasting. And that second order disruption caused people to be able to figure out when it was going to rain and when they didn't want to wash their car. So it's important to keep in mind that even though we feel like we might be in an insulated industry, we're not immune to other trends in the broader environment. For example, back when I was running a retirement community, we implemented our first electronic health record, and it was largely just like copying what we had been doing on paper, but now on a computer. Nowadays, we see more and more tools harnessing the technology and being really quite different than just paper. For instance, Interact or automated alerts, dashboarding, and third-party data sharing all kind of change how we actually deliver the care.
One of my favorite speeches of all time, I think it's actually genius, is JFK's speech at Rice Stadium talking about going to the moon. And if you look at what he was talking about then, I think it was very forward and future facing. Around the same time, J. Paul Getty came up with a quote, which I think is really appropriate for what we're looking at today, which is that in times of rapid change, experience could be your worst enemy. It's not a matter of figuring out how to do things we've been doing better. It's really about figuring out how to do new things. So if we look at the key takeaways from the Great Acceleration, one of them is that linear thinking in an exponential age leads to pitfall. And unfortunately, biologically, we're just hardwired to think linearly. So it really takes time to set aside thought and effort to think about how we're going to deal with things under this new age. Technology and trends are all growing exponentially, and change is the new norm. We used to look at projects as we're at point A, we just need to get through this change to get to point B, and then things will be stable and we can get back to work as usual. But really the new norm now is going from point A to point B to point C. And how do we deal with that? So how do we develop our organizational cultures to learn how to rapidly adapt to these changes?
And so some of the key questions we need to ask are, how does this apply to senior care? Is senior care a rapidly evolving industry? We can debate that, but even as we talked about with second order disruptions, we need to be aware of the broader environment. So in what areas is senior care growing exponentially? Where is the broader environment going to impact senior care? And how does this all play out in reality? Are you using labor or innovation to drive growth? These are some key questions we need to think about. And then on the regulatory side, can regulatory rate of change keep up with these accelerating trends? If not, how do we manage that gap? How do we bridge the gap? And if so, how do we keep up with that rapid change of regulation?
So the first trend we want to talk about here today is speed. And it's really speed in every form of it, just raw speed too. It's not really an allegory for anything else. If you look at things like automation, lean manufacturing, agile development, these are all a means to an end, and they're all about delivering something faster, getting something in the hands of folks faster, or making decisions faster, like while on the clock faster. And we've found that if you look at different industries, and we'll talk about a bunch of different ones here, speed is really one of the primary drivers of consumer engagement today. So if you look at corporate lifespans, for example, the corporate lifespan is shrinking very rapidly. The time to generate value is accelerating as well. Instagram, for example, had 13 employees and in 2 years became a billion-dollar company. That used to be decades worth of work. 24 months is all it took from entry into the market to make $1 billion worth of value. WhatsApp, in 5 years, with 55 employees, grew to be a $20 billion company before it was purchased. When Facebook bought WhatsApp, that happened to be $20 billion, was the same amount of outstanding national debt that Ukraine had. So you have WhatsApp creating basically national debt levels worth of value in a matter of half a decade. If you look at the average lifespan of companies on the S&P 500, in the 1920s, it was about 67 years is how long they would stay on there. Today's lifespan is around 18, and the age continues to go down. So companies are growing very rapidly, but they're also being rapidly displaced. It means that age and size and reputation of your company are really decoupled from market growth now. What used to take generations to achieve is now happening in the blink of an eye. And as company lifetimes shrink, it's changing expectations about realities of lifetime employment. The idea that you would go and work for a company and stay with them throughout your whole lifetime is probably not applicable in a lot of industries now. Cells don't last as long as a human lifetime necessarily. I think one of the areas where senior care is very unique is the fact that we do have long, prolonged tenure. Where I used to work, we had folks that be working for us for 20, 30 years. And that is very odd, actually, if you look at the broader industrial trends. So how are we capitalizing on that as an industry? If we can offer the type of tenure people used to want and can no longer find, is that something that we're marketing? Is that something we're playing up as a strength?
Waiting times have a huge impact on consumer engagement and consumer satisfaction. Google data on page speed, they used to put those numbers at the bottom of the page to show how fast they were. Obsessive focus on speed, not just how fast you get the results, but also how relevant the results were. A lot of things have tried to optimize searching, and searching is even really the new organizational tool. You don't as often put things in folders anymore, or assign your emails to different boxes. Now you just search and you find things much more quickly. Pinterest increased their search engine traffic and sign-ups by 15% when they reduced the perceived wait times by 40%. Additionally, the BBC found they lost an additional 10% of users for every additional second their site took to load. And DoubleClick by Google found that 53% of mobile sites visits were abandoned if the page took longer than 3 seconds to load. So what are your guests and residents required to wait for? What impact is that having on their satisfaction, on their engagement? How hard is it to access information? You know, is your internet optimized for speed and access for your employees, for your guests, for your residents? Can you accept digital payments to simplify transactions? Can you make the wait times go down?
We look at the mortgage industry. Rocket Mortgage launched during a Super Bowl with a Super Bowl ad. And at that moment, there was an industry executive who had been quoted as saying, "This is our e-surance moment. This is going to change the whole industry." For those of you that aren't familiar, Rocket Mortgage is an online website. They also have an app you can download. Allows you to apply for a new mortgage on a new home or to refinance your mortgage. And they accomplish that in as little as 30 minutes. A large part of what they're doing is they can log into your bank accounts, they can log into other institutions and pull a lot of the information they need directly from those. They can pull information about a property from other sites such as Zillow so that they know about the property and you're not filling in information that already exists in other databases to dramatically cut down on the time that you apply for a mortgage for. Another interesting fact about eSurance itself, actually, eSurance was later bought by Allstate, and until very recently was sold as a separate brand. You could buy insurance from Allstate, you could buy it from eSurance. At the end of the day, you were really buying it from the same person. What's interesting, though, is that the rates on eSurance tended to be a little bit higher than in Allstate, even though at the end of the day it was the same insurance. But the satisfaction scores with eSurance were much higher than those with Allstate. So people were willing to pay for a little bit more and be more satisfied with the experience because of other factors such as the speed and ease of use of that tool. So if we look at this today and we look at senior care, where can we pull information from existing sources rather than asking people to fill things out for them? For example, when I go to my kid's school, when I need a visitor's badge, they just scan your driver's license. They pull your name, your information, address, everything they need. You don't have to fill out any forms. It's very quick, and it's probably more accurate than people doing it themselves. When someone comes to visit, they refilling the same information over and over again. If someone transitions from one level of care to another, are they giving you information you already have somewhere else in your system? What does your admissions process look like? Is that an old school piece where people are filling out forms one after another and they have to come into your office to do it? Or can you use something like DocuSign where they can review things online, bring it to their friends and family? We know families are a big driver in decisions, so they can take it to them to help with, and then they can just fill out the form online or on an app, so they can do that wherever it's convenient for them. And what other processes and interactions do you have today that could be handled through a website or handled through technological means rather than having people come in and do it in person or fill out forms? For example, if someone wants to update their ACH information for billing, is that something they need to wait for business hours for? Or could they do that at 11 at night when it strikes them and do it from home?
And access to services and goods has become faster and easier than ever. Amazon has disrupted the industry and taken the expectation of shipping down to 2 days. They've taken the cost away, included in a membership. You know, they've taken ordering to one click, so you have to reduce the steps you take between impulse and actually action, getting the goods. And today, now they've even taken it down to 2 hours, free shipping within 2 hours in a lot of places in the United States. Indeed, Key by Amazon delivers the goods right in your home without any having packages sitting outside your door. So how are services in senior care offering this convenience? How long are residents having to wait for services? Do services and goods come to our residents, or do they have to come, or do the residents have to come to you to get what they want?
You look at Netflix, another area where speed is a primary driver. Netflix, in its original form, used to mail out DVDs by mail and ended up disrupting all of Blockbuster with that, put Blockbuster out of business. And just as others were trying to pick up on the game and start their own DVD rental services, Netflix pre-disrupted themselves and said, you know what, this isn't fast enough. We're going to deliver it directly to your TV from anywhere, and started the first real popular streaming service. A huge amount of content, and you could watch whatever you wanted on demand. You didn't have to even wait for the mail to show up now. And we've seen that they're continuing to disrupt themselves. Originally, Netflix was the only game out there. They would license a bunch of content. Others have caught on. So you have Hulu and Disney Plus and a plethora of other competitors, with more still joining the market. So now it's shifted from not just on-demand entertainment, but to creation of original content. You see the same thing happening in the music industry. You have Spotify and Apple Music, massive catalogs, almost all music you could ever want to listen to at your fingertips with no waiting. You don't have to buy a CD. You have one set cost. You have all music of all time available to you. And you don't have to think about it. Whatever you want to listen to is available for you. So if you look at life enrichment programs today, how much of them are on demand? How much is kind of old school TV where it's a scheduled piece, you show up on time and that's what's happening, versus entertainment or interaction that can happen on the terms I want as a resident? How original is your program offering? You don't have to do everything from scratch. You can bring in other pieces. You can go with old classics. But what's your Game of Thrones? What's the thing that really drives engagement? Says, this is the place to be. If you look at your programming, is it only available to your residents? Is it something that maybe we should be opening this up to a broader audience? Is there things you can do? Are there things you can do with local community colleges, your local church affiliations or others, where you're partnering with other entities to create original content and provide it to a broader community as opposed to just focusing on the facility itself?
Dining and other retail outlets have made ordering and pickup extremely easy. Starbucks, for instance, Panera, you can order ahead, you can use your app, you can just pick it up in the store. You don't even need to interact with anyone if you don't want to. So how does that impact senior care? Can your residents order things digitally? Is there an integrated interface like Grubhub where they can order not only your dining products, but also from external companies? What offerings do you have that are great that you could be able to make available to the broader community through apps like Postmates, Uber Eats, Grubhub, etc.? Instacart onboards several thousand quote-unquote shoppers every week, basically contract employees. So they have 800 employees, but over 70,000 shoppers. Uber and Instacart both provide immediate access for services for consumers, but they also provide nearly on-demand access to part-time employment. How can we harness some of that quick onboarding? How does your PRN pool compare, for instance? How can PRN pools become more flexible? Is there a possibility to share the pool with other facilities located nearby?
If you look at sites like Zara or H&M and Primark, these are what are known as fast fashion, and they're dominating the fashion industry. Armancio Ortega is in the running to be the richest man in the world. He's actually overtaken Bill Gates 4 different times. Not necessarily everyone has heard of him, but how he has driven his fortune and his value has been to speed to market in the fashion industry, and really primarily through Zara. And what he's seen is that to win market share is about cutting down the time between runway and store. It used to be that you'd have runway additions and then things would hit the store several months later, sometimes a whole season later. And what Zara, H&M, and Primark trying to do is, as it's hitting the runway, it's available in stores within hours at the same moment as you're seeing it on the runway. What they've determined is it's exceedingly difficult to guess what people are going to want or what needs are going to be in 3 months or 6 months' time. Instead, focus on current desires. What are the needs of the moment? How do we address those right now? At the same time, too, how do you have an exit plan? So you're not building up a bunch of inventory that's going to be of no use to you in 3 weeks' time or 3 months' time. So what strategy for any of these plans you implement? If you look at town halls today, are they focused on what's coming? It's fine to have a plan for the future. It's just as vital as dealing with the now. But is that the only place where you're focusing on what's going to come eventually? And eventually things are going to be great here. Versus what are the problems today? How are we dealing with them? What have we done since the last time we've talked? Do you only do customer surveys once a year? Plenty of places I know do them once a year because it's too much information to absorb and it's too much to do. But what if you were to do them on a more regular basis? What if there was a monthly survey or snap surveys that were focused on a very narrow piece that you could address and track that trend over time so you can show you're delivering value on a very rapid basis? Are you aware of the trends within your community? It's not just about what you want to push, but what are the current senior trends? For example, are there current dietary trends happening on campus? Are you able to deal with those? The growing amount of people who are vegetarian or vegan, there's keto diets. Are your dining plans able to meet the trends of the folks you're serving today? I think one of the key questions you can ask yourself for this, and this is even something you could find if you have someone on good terms, is if you find a former staff member who was with you 10 years ago and you bring them back in today, are they going to say, wow, this place is completely different, or this is pretty much what we were doing when I was here a decade ago? And if you look at current companies like Tesla, their new factories, people have described as looking like an alien dreadnought, just something out of the future. And what they've realized is it's not just about making electric cars. What they see the value driver for making cars is that factories are very inefficient. So we need to make factories that are 1 to 2 orders of magnitude more efficient at producing cars than current factories are. And a large part of that focus is on smart automation, automating tasks, and robots. But I think a key quote from Elon Musk is that humans are still underrated. It's for some tasks, humans remain essential. And that overplays directly into our industry. How you care for someone, how you show dignity to someone is not something that's going to change over time. It's not something that's on a growth curve somewhere. That remains absolutely the same. The problem is we've introduced all these other things like charting and documentation and forms and regulations that are taking up more and more of human time. And those are the types of things that computers and automation may actually be better at. So how do we automate those parts of the process to free up humans to deal with the human interaction, which is something they excel at and will always excel at? If you look at decision-making, how is your decision-making process going to this? Are you really working at the right abstraction layer? If you have an incident happen, is it that we're going to put new policies in place and it takes 6 weeks to do so, and by the time that happens, the incident's already forgotten about? Or are you building the next generation factory where you're looking at how you make decisions and your decision-making process itself so you can make faster decisions more quickly?
So some of the key takeaways for this section. Speed is the primary driver of customer satisfaction. Integrating information sources have multiplicative value. It's not just the addition of information from one source to another, but actually a multiplication of impact by integrating more informational sources. Focus on current trends, but also build the ability to shift with consumer needs. And for leadership, responding to employee demands and trends has the same speed challenges as it does for your customers.
So some key questions that would be interesting to continue the conversation on are how fast can you adapt, learn, hire, and train? We talked earlier about what kind of culture do you have? Is it one that's adaptable, that is comfortable with change, or is it one that's looking for a status quo that may not exist anymore? How fast can you hire and onboard folks? How long does it take for an employee to join your organization and become productive? If you had to hire a whole bunch of folks in 1 week, what could you do? How much could you do on that? Where do you go from information pull to information push? Where are you taking the information that exists in all these systems you have and deriving value from that for yourself and your customers? What dashboards and decision tools do you have in place to make the good decision at the right time and make it faster? And what type of skills do you look for when you're hiring? We don't necessarily think about skills like typing or the ability to use a computer fluently as classic care skills, but given modern realities, those can make the difference between a good caregiver and an excellent caregiver. And lastly, you look at things like your customer call line experience and how does that compare to other customer experiences and what folks expect? Is it still the light on in a hallway that someone needs to see, find out what's going on, go find the right person and come back? Just very time consuming? Or is it a modern approach where people are getting what they want when they need it?
Well, thank you for joining us today for Aging Services and the Great Acceleration. This was part 1 of a 3-part series focused on the background of the Great Acceleration and the first trend of speed. Our next trend will be talking about individualized service being greater than customized service, and that's coming up in March 26th at noon. You can sign up now at Petalo.ai/webinar.
If you want to download these slides, they're also available at the link currently on your screen. And if you have any feedback for us or want to continue any of the conversations or discussions we had today, please feel free to reach out to us at info@petalo.ai. Thanks for your